A band of children followed Rael on her walk. "Hello, hippie," they said, 25 years too late. "What is your name?" Then someone threw a small stone at her, and her childhood fled, flailing its thin arms. On her way back, looping around the Yemenem house, Rael emerged onto the main road. Outside Lucky Press, Comrade K.N.M. Pillai was standing at his boundary wall talking to a man on the other side. The man across the wall shuffled through a bunch of photographs in a plastic sachet, with an air of contrived interest. Rael tried to walk past unnoticed. It was absurd of her to have imagined that she could. "Ayo, Rael Mol," Comrade K.N.M. Pillai said, recognizing her instantly. "Orkunilri, Comrade Uncle." "Ur," Rael said. Did she remember him? She did indeed. After a brief silence and other series of small nods, the man handed Comrade Pillai the sachet of photographs. He had a bus to catch. "So," Comrade Pillai's smile broadened as he turned all his attention like a searchlight on Rael. "Mol's husband," he wanted to know. "Hasn't come." "Any issues?" "No," Rael said. "Still in planning stages, I suppose. Or expecting?" "We're divorced," Rael hoped to shock him into silence. "Divorced!" His voice rose to such a high register that it cracked on the question mark. He even pronounced the word as though it were a form of death. "That is most unfortunate," he said when he had recovered. It occurred to Comrade Pillai that this generation was perhaps paying for its forefathers' bourgeois decadence. One was mad, the other divorced, probably barren. "And Mon?" he whispered confidentially. "How is he?" "Fine," Rael said. "He's fine." "Ayo pavam," Comrade Pillai whispered. "Poor fellow." Rael wondered what he had gained by questioning her so closely and then completely disregarding her answers. "Lenin is in Delhi now," Comrade Pillai came out with it finally, unable to hide his pride. "Working with foreign embassies. See?" He handed Rael the cellophane sachet. They were mostly photographs of Lenin and his family. Rael handed Comrade Pillai back the sachet of photographs and tried to leave. "1 minute," Comrade Pillai said. He flipped through the pack of photographs to the last one. "Orkunundo." It was an old black-and-white picture, one that Chaco took with the Rolleiflex camera that Margaret Kochima had brought him as a Christmas present. All 4 of them were in it, Lenin, Esta, Sophie Mol, and herself, standing in front of the veranda of the Yemenem house. Lenin, Rael, and Esta looked like frightened animals that had been caught in the headlights of a car. Only Sophie Mol, with first-world panache, had prepared for herself, for her biological father's photo, a face. She had turned her eyelids inside out so that her eyes looked like pink-veined flesh petals. She wore a set of protruding false teeth cut from the yellow rind of a sweet lime. Her tongue pushed through the trap of teeth and had Mamachi's silver thimble fitted on the end of it. She had hijacked it the day she arrived and vowed to spend her holidays drinking only from a thimble. She held out a lit candle in each hand. One leg of her denim bell-bottoms was rolled up to expose a white, bony knee on which a face had been drawn. That was only days before she died. Sophie Mol. Thimble drinker. Coughing cartwheeler. She arrived on the Bombay Cochin flight, hatted, bell-bottomed, and loved from the beginning. At Cochin Airport, Rael's new knickers were polka-dotted and still crisp. The rehearsals had been rehearsed. It was the day of the play, the culmination of the "What will Sophie Mol think?" week. In the morning at the Hotel Sea Queen, Ammu helped Rael to put on her frothy airport frock. It was one of those baffling aberrations in Ammu's taste, a cloud of stiff yellow lace with tiny silver sequins and a bow on each shoulder. The frilled skirt was underpinned with buckram to make it flare. Rael worried that it didn't really go with her sunglasses. Ammu held out the crisp, matching knickers for her. Rael, with her hands on Ammu's shoulders, climbed into her new knickers, left leg, right leg, and gave Ammu a kiss on each dimple, left cheek, right cheek. The elastic snapped softly against her stomach. "Thank you, Ammu," Rael said. "Thank you," Ammu said. "For my new frock and knickers," Rael said. Ammu smiled. "You're welcome, my sweetheart," she said, but sadly. The moth on Rahel's heart lifted a downy leg, then put it back. Its little leg was cold. A little less her mother loved her. Esther was wearing a long-sleeved red shirt with a pointed collar and black drain-pipe trousers. His puff looked crisp and surprised, like well-whipped egg white. Esther, with some basis, it must be admitted, said that Rael looked stupid in her airport frock. Rael slapped him, and he slapped her back. They weren't speaking to each other at the airport. Chaco, who usually wore a mundu, was wearing a funny tight suit and a shining smile. Ammu straightened his tie, which was odd and sideways. Ammu said, "What's happened suddenly to our man of the masses?" But she said it with her dimples, because Chaco was so bursty, so very happy. From the Sea Queen florist, Chaco had bought 2 red roses, which he held carefully, fatly, fondly. When Sophie Mol's plane appeared in the sky-blue Bombay Cochin sky, the crowd pushed against the iron railing to see more of everything. The arrivals lounge was a press of love and eagerness, because the Bombay Cochin flight was the flight that all the foreign returnees came home on. Their families had come to meet them. From all over Kerala, on long bus journeys, some of them had camped at the airport overnight and had brought food with them, and tapioca chips and chaka velaichu for the way back. "Don't forget you are ambassadors of India," Baby Kochima told Rael and Esther. "You're going to form their first impression of your country. 2-egg twin ambassadors. Their Excellencies Ambassador E. Elvis, pelvis, and Ambassador S. stick, insect." In her stiff lace dress and her fountain in a lovin' Tokyo, Rael looked like an airport fairy with appalling taste. She was hemmed in by humid hips and grim eagerness. She had her grandfather's moth on her heart. Esther watched the bumpy landing with a bottomless, bottomful feeling. The orange drink, lemon drink man knew where to find him. In the factory in Ayamanam, on the banks of the Meenachal. Then the Bombay Cochin people came out, from the cool air into the hot air. Crumpled people, uncrumpled on their way to the arrivals' lounge. And there they were, the foreign returnees, in wash-and-wear suits and rainbow sunglasses, with an end to grinding poverty in their aristocrat suitcases, with cement roofs for their thatched houses and geysers for their parents' bathrooms, puff sleeves and lipstick, mixie grinders and automatic flashes for their cameras, with keys to count and cupboards to lock, with a hunger for kappa and mean vevichu that they hadn't eaten for so long, with love and a lick of shame that their families who had come to meet them were so gawkish. Look at the way they dressed. Surely they had more suitable airport wear. Why did Malayalis have such awful teeth? And the airport itself, more like the local bus depot. The bird shit on the building. Oh, going to the dogs, India is. When long bus journeys and overnight stays at the airport were met by love and a lick of shame, small cracks appeared, which would grow and grow, and before they knew it, the foreign returnees would be trapped outside the history house and have their dreams redreamed. Then, there, among the wash-and-wear suits and shiny suitcases, Sophie Mol, thimble drinker, coughing cartwheeler. She walked down the runway, the smell of London in her hair, yellow bottoms of bells flat backwards around her ankles, long hair floated out from under her straw hat. Across the tall iron railing that separated meters from the Met and greeters from the Gret, Chaco, beaming, bursting through his suit and sideways tie, bowed to his new daughter and ex-wife. "Hello, ladies," Chaco said in his reading aloud voice, last night's voice in which he said, "Love, madness, hope, infinite joy. And how was your journey?" And the air was full of thoughts and things to say. But at times like these, only the small things are ever said. The big things lurk unsaid inside. "Say hello and how do you do," Margaret Kochema said to Sophie Mol. "Hello and how do you do," Sophie Mol said, through the iron railing, to everyone in particular. "One for you and one for you," Chaco said with his roses. "And thank you," Margaret Kochema said to Sophie Mol. "And thank you," Sophie Mol said to Chaco, mimicking her mother's question mark. Margaret Kochema shook her a little for her impertinence. "You're welcome," Chaco said. "Now, let me introduce everybody." Then, more for the benefit of onlookers and eavesdroppers, because Margaret Kochema needed no introduction really, "My wife, Margaret." Margaret Kochema smiled and wagged her rose at him. "Ex-wife, Chaco." Her lips formed the words, though her voice never spoke them. Anybody could see that Chaco was a proud and happy man to have had a wife like Margaret, white, in a flowered printed frock with legs underneath, and brown back freckles on her back and arm freckles on her arms. But around her the air was sad somehow, and behind the smile in her eyes the grief was a fresh shining blue. Because of a calamitous car crash, because of a Joe-shaped hole in the universe. "Hello, all," she said. "I feel I've known you for years." "Hello, Wall." "My daughter, Sophie," Chaco said, and laughed a small, nervous laugh that was worried, in case Margaret Kochema said, "ex-daughter." But she didn't. It was an easy-to-understand laugh, not like the orange drink, lemon drink man's laugh that Esther hadn't understood. "Lo," Sophie Mol said. She was taller than Esther, and bigger. Her eyes were blue-gray-blue. Her pale skin was the color of beach sand, but her hatted hair was beautiful deep red brown. And yes, oh yes, she had Papachi's nose waiting inside hers. An imperial entomologist's nose within a nose, a moth lover's nose. She carried her made-in-England go-go bag that she loved. "Ammu, my sister," Chaco said. Ammu said a grown-up's "hello" to Margaret Kochema, and a children's "hello" to Sophie Mol. Rael watched hawk-eyed to try and gauge how much Ammu loved Sophie Mol, but couldn't. "My aunt, baby," Chaco said. Sophie Mol was puzzled. She regarded baby Kochema with a beady-eyed interest. She knew of cow babies and dog babies, bear babies, yes. She would soon point out to Rael a bat baby. But aunt babies confounded her. Baby Kochema said, "Hello, Margaret," and "Hello, Sophie Mol." She said Sophie Mol was so beautiful that she reminded her of a wood sprite, of Ariel. "Do you know who Ariel was?" baby Kochema asked Sophie Mol. "Ariel in The Tempest?" Sophie Mol said she didn't. "Where the bee sucks, there suck I?" baby Kochema said. Sophie Mol said she didn't. "Shakespeare's The Tempest?" baby Kochema persisted. All this was, of course, primarily to announce her credentials to Margaret Kochema, to set herself apart from the sweeper class. "She's trying to boast," Ambassador E. Pelvis whispered in Ambassador S. Insect's ear. Ambassador Rahel's giggle escaped in a blue-green bubble and burst into the hot airport air. Pfft was the sound it made. Baby Kochema saw it and knew that it was Esther who had started it. "And now for the VIPs, Chaco said, still using his reading aloud voice. "My nephew, Esteban." "Elvis Presley," baby Kochema said for revenge. "I'm afraid we're a little behind the times here." Everyone looked at Esther and laughed. From the soles of Ambassador Esther's beige and pointy shoes, an angry feeling rose and stopped around his heart. "How do you do, Esteban?" Margaret Kochema said. "Fine, thank you." Esther's voice was sullen. "Esther," Ammu said affectionately, "when someone says, 'How do you do?' you're supposed to say, 'How do you do?' back, not 'Fine, thank you.' Come on, say, 'How do you do?'" Ambassador Esther looked at Ammu. "Go on," Ammu said to Esther. "How do you do?" Esther's sleepy eyes were stubborn. In Malayalam, Ammu said, "Did you hear what I said?" Ambassador Esther felt blue-gray blue eyes on him and an imperial entomologist's nose. He didn't have a how do you do in him. "Está bien?" Ammu said, and an angry feeling rose in her and stopped around her heart. She had wanted a smooth performance, a prize for her children in the Indo-British behavior competition. Chaco said to Ammu in Malayalam, "Please, later, not now." And Ammu's angry eyes on Esther said, "All right, later." And later became a horrible, menacing, goosebumpy word. Later. Like a deep-sounding bell in a mossy well, shivery and furred, like moth's feet. The play had gone bad. "And my niece?" Chaco said. "Where's Rael?" He looked around and couldn't find her. Ambassador Rael, unable to cope with seesawing changes in her life, had raveled herself like a sausage into the dirty airport curtain and wouldn't unravel. A sausage with bata sandals. "Hello, Rael," Margaret Kochema said to the dirty airport curtain. "How do you do?" the dirty curtain replied in a mumble. "Aren't you going to come out and say hello?" Margaret Kochema said in a kind schoolteacher voice. Ambassador Rael wouldn't come out of the curtain because she couldn't. She couldn't because she couldn't. Because everything was wrong, and soon there would be a later for both her and Esther, full of furred moths and icy butterflies and deep-sounding bells and moss. And an owl. "Just ignore her," Ammu said, and smiled tightly. Rahel's mind was full of millstones with blue eyes. Ammu loved her even less now. "Here comes the baggage," Chaco said brightly, glad to get away. "Come, Sophiekins, let's get your bags." Sophiekins? Esther watched as they walked along the railing, pushing through the crowds that moved aside, intimidated by Chaco's suit and sideways tie and his generally bursty demeanor. He walked on this side of the railing, Margaret Kochema and Sophie Mol on that. When there was no railing left between them, Chaco kissed Margaret Kochema and then picked Sophie Mol up. "The last time I did this, I got a wet shirt for my pains," Chaco said and laughed. He hugged her and hugged her and hugged her. He kissed her blue eyes, her entomologist's nose, her hatted red-brown hair. Then Sophie Mol said to Chaco, "Excuse me, do you think you could put me down now? I'm, not really used to being carried." So Chaco put her down. Ambassador Esther saw with stubborn eyes that Chaco's suit was suddenly looser, less bursty. And while Chaco got the bags at the dirty curtain window, later became now. Esther saw how baby Kochema's neck mole licked its chops and throbbed with delicious anticipation. Dur-dum, dur-dum. "All right," Ammu said. "That's enough. Both of you. Come out of there, Rael." Inside the curtain, Rael closed her eyes and thought of the green river, of the quiet, deep-swimming fish, and the gossamer wings of the dragonflies that could see behind them in the sun. She thought of her luckiest fishing rod that Velutha had made for her. She thought of Velutha and wished she was with him. Then Esther unraveled her. Ammu looked at them. The air was quiet except for the sound of baby Kochema's throbbing neck mole. "So," Ammu said. And it was really a question. "So?" And it hadn't an answer. "If you ever," Ammu said, "and I mean this, ever again disobey me in public, I will see to it that you are sent away to somewhere where you will jolly well learn to behave. Is that clear?" When Ammu was really angry, she said, "Jolly well." Jolly well was a deeply well with larfing dead people in it. "Is that clear?" Ammu said again. Frightened eyes and a fountain looked back at Ammu. Sleepy eyes and a surprised puff looked back at Ammu. 2 heads nodded 3 times. "Yes, it's clear." But baby Kochema was dissatisfied with the fizzling out of a situation that had been so full of potential. She tossed her head. As if, she said. Ammu turned to her, and the turn of her head was a question. It's useless, Baby Kochima said. They're sly. They're uncouth. Deceitful. They're growing wild. You can't manage them. Ammu turned back to Esta and Rael, and her eyes were blurred jewels. Everybody says that children need a baba, and I say no, not my children. Do you know why? Two heads nodded. Why? Tell me, Ammu said. And not together, but almost, Estepan and Rael said, because you're our Ammu and our baba, and you love us double. More than double, Ammu said. So remember what I told you. People's feelings are precious, and when you disobey me in public, everybody gets the wrong impression. Ambassador E. Pelvis and Ambassador S. Insect hung their heads. Now, I want you to go and say hello properly, Ammu said. Are you going to do that or not? Two heads nodded twice. On their way across the airport car park, hot weather crept into their clothes and dampened crisp knickers. The children lagged behind, weaving through parked cars and taxis. Does yours hit you? Sophie Mol asked. Rael and Esta, unsure of the politics of this, said nothing. Mine does, Sophie Mol said invitingly. Mine even slaps. Ours doesn't, Esta said loyally. Lucky, Sophie Mol said. Lucky rich boy with pocket money and a grandmother's factory to inherit. No worries. Who do you love most in the world? Rael asked Sophie Mol. Joe, Sophie Mol said without hesitation. My dad. He died 2 months ago. We've come here to recover from the shock. But Chaco's your dad, Esta said. He's just my real dad, Sophie Mol said. Where's your dad? Sophie Mol wanted to know. He's... And Rael looked at Esta for help. Not here, Esta said. Do you know how to sashay? Sophie Mol wanted to know. No, we don't sashay in India, Ambassador Esta said. Well, in England we do, Sophie Mol said. All the models do. On television. Look, it's easy. And the three of them, led by Sophie Mol, sashayed across the airport car park, swaying like fashion models. Shadows followed them, silver jets in a blue church sky, like moths in a beam of light. When she saw the carrier with the painted pickle bottles and the list of Paradise products, Margaret Kochima said, "Oh dear, I feel as though I'm in an advertisement." She said "oh dear" a lot. Sophie Mol sat in front between Chaco and Margaret Kochima, just her hat peeping over the car seat, because she was their daughter. Rael and Esta sat at the back. The Plymouth rushed through the green midday heat, promoting pickles on its roof and the sky-blue sky in its tail fins. Just outside a Yemenem, they drove into a cabbage-green butterfly, or perhaps it drove into them. In Papachi's study, mounted butterflies and moths had disintegrated into small heaps of iridescent dust that powdered the bottom of their glass display cases, leaving the pins that had impaled them naked. Rael, on a stool on top of a table, rummaged in a book cupboard with dull, dirty glass panes. Her bare footprints were clear in the dust on the floor. Her life had a size and a shape now. She had half-moons under her eyes and a team of trolls on her horizon. Rael groped behind a row of books and brought out hidden things. A silver crucifix on a string of beads, Baby Kochima's rosary. She held it up against the light. Each greedy bead grabbed its share of sun. A shadow fell across a sunlit rectangle on the study floor. Rael turned towards the door with her string of light. Imagine, it's still here. I stole it, after you were returned. That word slipped out easily. Returned, as though that was what twins were meant for, to be borrowed and returned, like library books. Esta wouldn't look up, an Esta-shaped hole in the universe. Behind the books, Rael's puzzled fingers encountered something else. Another magpie had had the same idea. It was a flat packet wrapped in clear plastic and stuck with sellotape. A scrap of white paper inside it said Esteban and Rael in Ammu's writing. There were 4 tattered notebooks in it. On their covers they said Wisdom Exercise Notebooks, with a place for name, school, college, class, subject. 2 had her name on them, and 2 Esta's. On the front of the book, Esta had rubbed out his surname with spit and taken half the paper with it. Over the whole mess he had written in pencil, Unknown. Esteban, unknown. His surname postponed for the time being, while Ammu chose between her husband's name and her father's. Next to class it said 6 years. Next to subject it said story writing. Rael sat cross-legged on the stool on the table. Esteban unknown, she said. She opened the book. Ammu had corrected the spelling mistakes, and below the first essay had written, If I am talking to somebody, you may interrupt me only if it is very urgent. When you do, please say, Excuse me. I will punish you very severely if you disobey these instructions. Please complete your corrections. Little Ammu. Who never completed her corrections, who had to pack her bags and leave, because she had no locusts standi, because Chaco said she had destroyed enough already. Who came back to Yemenem with asthma and a rattle in her chest that sounded like a faraway man shouting. Esta never saw her like that, wild, sick, sad. The last time Ammu came back to Yemenem, Rael had just been expelled from Nazareth Convent. Ammu had lost the latest of her succession of jobs, as a receptionist in a cheap hotel, because she had been ill and had missed too many days of work. The hotel couldn't afford that, they told her. They needed a healthier receptionist. On that last visit, Ammu spent the morning with Rael in her room. It was as though Ammu believed that if she refused to acknowledge the passage of time, if she willed it to stand still in the lives of her twins, it would. That whole morning, Ammu talked incessantly. She asked Rael questions, but never let her answer them. If Rael tried to say something, Ammu would interrupt with a new thought or query. She seemed terrified of what adult thing her daughter might say, and thaw frozen time. She was swollen with cortisone, moon-faced, not the slender mother Rael knew. She carried her breath in a glass inhaler in her tattered handbag, brown Broven fumes. Each breath she took was like a war won against the steely fist that was trying to squeeze the air from her lungs. Rael watched her mother breathe. Each time she inhaled, the hollows near her collarbones grew steep and filled with shadows. Over lunch, she belched like a truck driver and said, "Excuse me," in a deep, unnatural voice. Ammu smiled at the silence around the table as she picked fried emperor fish off the bone. Mamachi asked her if she'd been drinking and suggested that she visit Rael as seldom as possible. Ammu got up from the table and left without saying a word, not even goodbye. "Go and see her off," Chaco said to Rael. Rael pretended she hadn't heard him. She went on with her fish. She hated her mother then, hated her. She never saw her again. Ammu died in a grimy room in the Barat Lodge in Alepe, where she had gone for a job interview as someone's secretary. She died alone, with a noisy ceiling fan for company and no Esther to lie at the back of her and talk to her. She was 31, not old, not young, but a viable, diable age. The sweeper found her in the morning. He switched off the fan. The church refused to bury Ammu, on several counts, so Chaco hired a van to transport the body to the electric crematorium. He had her wrapped in a dirty bedsheet and laid out on a stretcher. Rael thought she looked like a Roman senator. "Et tu, Ammu?" She thought and smiled, remembering Esta. The crematorium had the same rotten, run-down air of a railway station, except that it was deserted. When Ammu's turn came, Chaco held Rael's hand tightly. She didn't want her hand held. She used the slickness of crematorium sweat to slither out of his grip. No one else from the family was there. The steel door of the incinerator went up, and the muted hum of the eternal fire became a red roaring. The heat lunged out at them like a famished beast. Then Rael's Ammu was fed to it. Her hair, her skin, her smile, her voice. The way she used Kipling to love her children before putting them to bed. We be of one blood, thou and I. Her good-night kiss. The way she held knickers out for Rael to climb into. Left leg, right leg. All this was fed to the beast, and it was satisfied. She was their Ammu and their Baba, and she had loved them double. The door of the furnace clanged shut. There were no tears. Rael asked Chaco how the crematorium management knew whose ashes were whose. Chaco said they must have a system. Had Esta been with them, he would have kept the receipt. He was the keeper of records, the natural custodian of bus tickets, bank receipts, cash memos, checkbook stubs. Little man, he lived in a caravan, dum-dum. But Esta wasn't with them. Everybody decided it was better this way. They wrote to him instead. Rael never wrote to him. There are things that you can't do, like writing letters to a part of yourself, to your feet or hair or heart. In Papachi's study, Rael, not old, not young, with floor dust on her feet, looked up from the wisdom exercise notebook and saw that Estepan unknown was gone. She climbed down off the stool off the table and walked out to the veranda. She saw Esta's back disappearing through the gate. It was mid-morning and about to rain again. A cock crowed in the distance, and its voice separated into two, like a soul peeling off an old shoe. Rael stood there with her tattered wisdom notebooks. In the front veranda of an old house, below a button-eyed bison head, where years ago, on that day, Sophie Mol came. "Welcome home, our Sophie Mol," was performed. Things can change in a day. It was a grand old house, the Ayemenem house, but aloof-looking, as though it had little to do with the people who lived in it. 9 steep steps led from the driveway up to the front veranda. The elevation gave it the dignity of a stage, and everything that happened there took on the aura and significance of performance. Below the stuffed button-eyed bison head, with the portraits of her father-in-law and mother-in-law on either side, Mamachi sat in a low wicker chair at a wicker table, on which stood a green glass vase with a single stem of purple orchids curving from it. The afternoon was still and hot. The air was waiting. Mamachi held a gleaming violin under her chin. Her opaque 50s sunglasses were black and slanty-eyed, with rhinestones on the frames. Her sari was starched and perfumed, off-white and gold. Her diamond earrings shone in her ears like tiny chandeliers. Her ruby rings were loose. Her pale, fine skin was creased like cream on cooling milk and dusted with tiny red moles. She was beautiful, old, unusual, regal. In her younger years, with prescience and good management, Mamachi had collected all her falling hair in a small embroidered purse that she kept on her dressing table. When there was enough of it, she made it into a netted bun, which she kept hidden in a locker with her jewelry. A few years earlier, when her hair began to thin and silver, to give it body, she wore her jet-black bun pinned to her small silver head. In her book, this was perfectly acceptable, since all the hair was hers. At night, when she took off her bun, she allowed her grandchildren to plait her remaining hair into a tight, oiled gray rat's tail with a rubber band at the end. One plaited her hair, while the other counted her uncountable moles. They took turns. She played lentement, a movement from the suite in D-G of Handel's Water Music. Behind her slanted sunglasses, her useless eyes were closed, but she could see the music as it left her violin and lifted into the afternoon like smoke. Inside her head, it was like a room with dark drapes drawn across a bright day. As she played, Her mind wandered back over the years to her first batch of professional pickles. How beautiful they had looked. Then she thought of Margaret Kochema, and the languid, liquid notes of Handel's music grew shrill and angry. Mamachi had never met Margaret Kochema, but she despised her anyway. Shopkeeper's daughter was how Margaret Kochema was filed away in Mamachi's mind. Of course, Mamachi would have despised Margaret Kochema even if she had been heir to the throne of England. It wasn't just her working-class background Mamachi resented. She hated Margaret Kochema for being Chaco's wife. She hated her for leaving him, but would have hated her even more had she stayed. The day that Chaco prevented Papachi from beating her, and Papachi had murdered his chair instead, Mamachi packed her wifely luggage and committed it to Chaco's care. From then onwards, he became the repository of all her womanly feelings, her man, her only love. She was aware of his libertine relationships with the women in the factory, but had ceased to be hurt by them. When baby Kochema brought up the subject, Mamachi became tense and tight-lipped. "He can't help having a man's needs," she said primly. Surprisingly, baby Kochema accepted this explanation, and the enigmatic, secretly thrilling notion of men's needs gained implicit sanction in the Ayemanem house. Neither Mamachi nor baby Kochema saw any contradiction between Chaco's Marxist mind and feudal libido. They only worried about the Naxalites, who had been known to force men from good families to marry servant girls whom they had made pregnant. Of course, they did not even remotely suspect that the missile, when it was fired, the one that would annihilate the family's good name forever, would come from a completely unexpected quarter. Mamachi had a separate entrance built for Chaco's room, which was at the eastern end of the house, so that the objects of his needs wouldn't have to go traipsing through the house. She secretly slipped them money to keep them happy. They took it because they needed it. They had young children and old parents, or husbands who spent all their earnings in toddy bars. The arrangement suited Mamachi because in her mind a fee clarified things, disjuncted sex from love, needs from feelings. In the dark, smoky kitchen, short Cochu Maria stood on her toes and iced the tall, double-deckered "Welcome Home, Our Sophie Mol" cake. She had short, thick forearms, fingers like cocktail sausages, and a broad, fleshy nose with flared nostrils. Her kanuku earrings were thick and gold. Her earlobes had been distended into weighted loops that swung around her neck, her earrings sitting in them like gleeful children in a merry-go, not all the way, round. Her right lobe had split open once and was sewn together again by Dr. Verghese. Cochu Maria couldn't stop wearing her kunuku because if she did, how would people know that despite her lowly cook's job, 75 rupees a month, she was a Syrian Christian, not a Pillai, not a Pulaya, or a Paravan, but a touchable, upper-caste Christian into whom Christianity had seeped like tea from a tea bag. Split lobes stitched back were a better option by far. Cochu Maria hadn't yet made her acquaintance with the television addict waiting inside her, the Hulk Hogan addict. She hadn't yet seen a television. She finished icing the tall cake, then she tipped her head back and squeezed the leftover icing onto her tongue. When Mamachi called from the veranda, "Cochu Maria, I hear the car!" Her mouth was full of icing and she couldn't answer. Distant sky-blue car sounds, past the bus stop, past the school, past the yellow church, and up the bumpy red road, through the rubber trees, sent a murmur through the dim, sooty premises of Paradise Pickles. The pickling, and the squashing, the slicing, boiling and stirring, the grating, salting, drying, the weighing and bottle sealing, stopped. "Chaco Sarvanu," the traveling whisper went. Pickled hands were washed and wiped in cobalt-blue aprons. Escaped wisps of hair were recaptured and returned to white headscarves. Mundus tucked up under aprons were let down. The gauze doors of the factory had sprung hinges and closed noisily on their own. And on one side of the driveway, beside the old well, in the shade of the Kodampuli tree, a silent blue-aproned army gathered in the green heat to watch. The sky-blue Plymouth turned in at the gate and crunched over the gravel driveway, crushing small shells and shattering little red and yellow pebbles. Children tumbled out. Collapsed fountains, flattened puffs, crumpled yellow bell-bottoms, and a go-go bag that was loved, jet-lagged and barely awake. Then the swollen-ankled adults, slow from too much sitting. "Have you arrived?" Mamachi asked, turning her slanty dark glasses towards the new sounds, car doors slamming, getting outedness. "Mamachi," Rael said to her beautiful blind grandmother, "Esther vomited in the middle of the sound of music, and—" Ammu touched her daughter gently on her shoulder, and her touch meant, "Shh." Rael looked around her and saw that she was in a play. But she had only a small part. She was just the landscape, a flower perhaps, or a tree, a face in the crowd, a townspeople. Nobody said hello to Rael, not even the blue army in the green heat. "Where is she?" Mamachi asked the car sounds. "Where is my Sophie Mol? Come here and let me see you." Chaco, in his "What Happened to Our Man of the Masses" suit and well-fed tie, led Margaret Kochema and Sophie Mol triumphantly up the 9 red steps like a pair of tennis trophies that he had recently won. And once again, only the small things were said. The big things lurked unsaid inside. "Hello, Mamachi," Margaret Kochema said in her kind school-teacher that sometimes slapped voice. "Thank you for having us. We needed so much to get away." Margaret Kochema took Mamachi's hands. The fingers were soft, the ruby rings were hard. "Hello, Margaret," Mamachi said. Not rude, not polite. Her dark glasses still on. "Welcome to Ayemanem. I was very sorry to hear about—" "Joe," Mamachi said. She sounded only a little sorry, not very sorry. There was a short, sad-about-Joe silence. "Where's my Sophie Mol?" Mamachi said. "Come here, and let your grandmother look at you." Sophie Mol was led to Mamachi. Even after a cornea transplant, Mamachi could only see light and shadow. The townspeople, in her fairy frock, saw Mamachi draw Sophie Mol close to her eyes to look at her. "Papachi's nose," Mamachi said. "Tell me, are you a pretty girl?" she asked Sophie Mol. "Yes," Sophie Mol said. "And tall?" "Tall for my age," Sophie Mol said. "Very tall," Baby Kochema said. "Much taller than Esther." "She's older," Ammu said. "Still," Baby Kochema said. A little way away, Velutha walked up the shortcut through the rubber trees, bare-bodied. On his back, his lucky leaf from the birthmark tree that made the monsoons come on time, his autumn leaf at night. Before he emerged through the trees and stepped into the driveway, Rael saw him and slipped out of the play and went to him. Ammu saw her go. Off stage, she watched them perform their elaborate official greeting. Velutha curtsied as he had been taught to, his mundu spread like a skirt, like the English dairymaid in The King's Breakfast. Rael bowed and said, "Bow." Then they hooked little fingers and shook hands gravely, with the mien of bankers at a convention. In the dappled sunlight filtering through the dark green trees, Ammu watched Velutha lift her daughter effortlessly, as though she was an inflatable child made of air. As he tossed her up and she landed in his arms, Ammu saw in Rael's face the high delight of the airborne young. She saw the ridges of muscle on Velutha's stomach grow taut and rise under his skin like the divisions on a slab of chocolate. She wondered at how his body had changed so quietly from a flat muscled boy's body into a man's body, polished with high wax body polish. He had high cheekbones and a white sudden smile. It was his smile that reminded Ammu of Velutha as a little boy. His smile was the only piece of baggage he had carried with him from boyhood into manhood. Suddenly, Ammu hoped that it had been him that Rael saw in the march. She hoped that under his careful cloak of cheerfulness, he housed a living, breathing anger against the smug, ordered world that she so raged against. She hoped it had been him. She was surprised at the extent of her daughter's physical ease with him, surprised that her child seemed to have a subworld that excluded her entirely. Ammu recognized vaguely that her thoughts were shot with a delicate purple tinge of envy. She didn't allow herself to consider who it was that she envied, the man or her own child, or just their world of hooked fingers and sudden smiles.